All righty. Welcome to Wednesday Night Live. Welcome to Granada Hills. It's Wednesday Night Live. We are entertaining the possibility tonight of everyone here having a stellar evening to hear my friend Harry Hart-Browne. I first met him, wait a minute, I'm supposed to do an opening invocation. That's what we do here. So will you join me in consciousness, please, for a moment? And know that right here and right now, the power and presence of Spirit has identified itself by means of each and every person sitting in a chair here. Those who are yet to come, those who have come, and those who are on the live stream tonight listening. I know that from my experience of this wonderful living spirit of light, Harry Hart-Browne, that there is no doubt in my mind that each and every person here will walk away with something to think about, something to know even about themselves, and to know more of Harry Hart-Browne as a professional actor and as a storyteller, a consummate storyteller. Just a wonderful, wonderful idea in the mind of God. And so tonight I know that since there is no time or space in the mind of God, those that are on the live stream and those that may listen to this at a later time, that everyone is in their right and perfect place. We are here by divine appointment. And so tonight we just simply allow for Spirit to infuse us with the spirit of Harry Hart-Browne and the story that he has to tell about the boy who saw true. Knowing as always that God is in the mix, all is well, as we say together, and so it is. So I've known Harry for probably about 20 years now. And he was never my neighbor. I knew him as the actor, Harry Hart-Browne, and we had him both here at Granada Hills some years ago when I was still the spiritual director here, and we had him when I went to Westlake. And I have to honestly state that performance that he gave is a totally different one than you're going to see tonight. If you saw him before, that performance is no longer, he's not doing it anymore. But The Boy Who Saw True came out of an actual diary that was found, that was written by a young boy, a boy who had second sight. And it was never in any way identified. He was never in any way identified. So somebody found the diary and published the book. And what you're getting here tonight is Harry's version of that, committed to memory. About 4 or 5 months ago, Reverend Nancy and I went to La Crescenta to hear him, and it was his beta test. And so tonight you're getting what we would call the real McCoy, the real Harry Hart-Browne, as he speaks about this little boy. And, fascinating about, the story is fascinating, having to do with the paranormal or the metaphysical or whatever it is that you want to call it. It was about a boy in Victorian England who was a clairvoyant. And there was some punishment involved in him speaking his truth, because like some of us who had unskilled parents, they were afraid of his gift. Instead of nurturing it and bringing it forth in grander and glorious ways, the parents were afraid of the gift, and they were afraid of what other people would think about their son, as though it were a reflection on them, I suppose. So Harry becomes the boy before our eyes. So without further ado, please give a very warm Granada Hills welcome to Harry Hart-Browne.
Thank you. Thank you. Today's January 1st, 1885, and my best chum Arnold said, or I thought he said, I'm going to keep a dairy in the new year. And so I said, oh, all right then, well, maybe I'll keep one too. And who knows, perhaps one day it'll be printed. But when I told my eldest sister Mildred, she said, oh, you're going to keep a dairy. What will you pay me to milk the cows? I said, what? She said, you can't even say the thing. Diary is your book. Dairy is buttermilk. Crikey. But when I told Pa, he said, that's right, my lad, you keep a diary. Always remember this. A thing worth doing at all is worth doing well. So, mind you, write it nicely. And if you don't know how to spell a word, you ask someone who does. And then Mama said, yes, that's right. And mind you, don't forget what your father says. Which I found very provoking. I could barely lift a finger without them giving me a lecture. Pa got up on the wrong side of bed today. He said, my liver's acting up, the bacon's too salt, my egg is hard-boiled, and that cat made another smell in the house. And then Mildred got very saucy and said, it's not our fault if Fluffy's got diarrhea. I do wish Mildred would not take liberties with Pa like that. I always know when he's got liver trouble, because his lights are all dirty, and she must know too. There's no use talking to Mildred. She just says, hold your noise. After church today, I asked, what does commit adultery mean? Pa sort of looked at the ceiling and said, what next? And Ma went red. Don't ask so many questions. And Janet, the maid, went, oh, and she left the room post-haste, and we could hear her bursting outside the door. So Mildred and I giggled, and Mama frowned, behave yourselves. But afterwards I asked Mildred, why this thusness? She said, I don't know. I find it very funny, I must say, because committing adultery comes in the commandments, and the vicar reads them out in church. Mama took me to the dentist today. I asked him, do you like fiddling inside people's mouths? He said, I don't mind much. I said, yes, but it must be a bit nasty for you if the people have been eating onions. He said, well, yes, it's not too pleasant then. And Mama giggled a bit, but also looked as if I oughtn't to pass that remark, because only common people eat onions. Ma looked poorly at dinner today, and she sighed. I do wish we could do without eating. So do I when there's cold mutton, with that horrid rice pudding, with that awful blancmange. We started lessons again today at home with our governess, Miss Griffin, and we're learning about Scripture. I think Jehovah's a horrid old gentleman, but I love Jesus, and today was about Jesus' circumcision. So, of course, we had to ask Miss Griffin, what is a circumcision? And she said, well, I can't be sure, but I think it's when they cut a bit of skin out of a baby's forehead and it makes a mark. Mildred said, well, that must hurt like Billy-O. Do they give the baby chloroform? And Miss Griffin got a bit tight and said, no. So I said, well, can you tell us what adultery means? Pa wouldn't tell us. Neither would Ma. She blushed and said, that you will understand when you are grown up. And she blew her nose. So Mildred said, well, you might tell us this much. Have you ever committed adultery? Good gracious, dear, of course not. And she turned red as a turkey cock. And so Mildred said, well, then I think you might tell us what it means, because if you don't, I shall look it up in the dick. I forbid you, she said, to do any such thing. If you must know, I'd rather tell you myself. When a man is so wicked, he wants to marry someone who's already married, that's called committing adultery. Mildred said, is that all? Why didn't you tell us before? I said, yes, why not? You didn't mind telling us about Cain and Abel the other day, and it would be much wickeder if I murdered Mildred than if I wanted to marry Auntie Maud, who's married to Uncle John. And Miss Griffin said, no one ever marries their auntie. This afternoon was Ma's at home, and about 50 old ladies came and made an awful noise in the drawing room, like the Tower of Babel. And in the middle of it, Mother shouted at us, "Children, come down, say how do you do?" So after we had done this to old Mrs. Bennet and all the rest of them, and I felt very uncomfy, she said, "You can run along now." That was that. Afterwards, I asked her, "Who was the old party with eyebrows like Pa's mustache?" She said, "Old party. Wherever did you pick that up?" I said, "Hobbs the gardener always calls people that." She said, "Well, it's very rude. You're not to let me hear you say it again." I shall jolly well say it in my diary if I want to, because I don't see why I shouldn't. The Reverend Mr. Wilcox came to Sunday dinner tonight, and Papa carved the fowl, and then there was ginger pudding, but I couldn't eat mine because something awful happened then. Mr. Wilcox said to Pa, "Why, Mildred's getting more like her mother every day." And then Mildred, who was in a naughty mood, said cheekily, "Oh, then I suppose if I grow up like Mother, you'd want to marry me." "Oh, well, of course," said Mr. Wilcox. Then said Mildred, getting cheekier still, "I expect that's because you really want to marry Mama." "Oh, well, of course," said Mr. Wilcox again, and he winked at Pa. Then Mildred said, "Oh, you naughty man, you've committed adultery." Mother went red as a flannel petticoat. "Mildred, leave the room." And Pa said some words in French, and I started blubbing. "It's not her fault. Miss Griffin said in Scripture that if a man wants to marry a lady who's married, it's called adultery." And Papa said, "Well, of all the..." And then Mr. Wilcox patted my back and said, "Never mind, little man, it's a funny world." And he gave me 2pence for sweets. It was all horrid. That night, I saw Jesus standing at the end of my bed, smiling at me. His lights were gold and green and blue and yellow, so lovely. And he seemed to want to comfort me for the horrid day I'd had. He has the most sweet blue eyes and long brown hair. He made me feel so happy. This is the 3rd time I've seen him, but I wish he'd come oftener. I asked Mama, "Do you often see Jesus?" Mildred giggled, and so did Janet, who was handing the potatoes, and I wonder why. And I wonder why Mama wouldn't tell me, but only said, "I am sure Jesus won't want to come to little boys who are not attentive in church and who do not think of what they are saying." I can't make out why Mama won't believe me when I tell her things. She always used to. Mildred says I'm dotty. Susan, the cook, had a very red nose this evening. And she made a lot of rude noises. Not the very rude ones, the others. And so Mildred asked Janet, and Janet said, "It's called belching. She tipples." But when Mildred asked Mama, "Why does the cook belch so much?" Mama said, "I suppose you picked up that horrid word from the servants. You are never to let me hear you say it again, or I shall really have to forbid you to go into the kitchen." "Well, what do you call it?" said Mildred. "Well, I don't mention such things at all," said Mama. They're never spoken of in company." "Why not?" said I. "Because." And then Papa pulled kind of a funny face and said, "I suppose I must go upstairs now and wash my hands." Last night I saw Uncle Willie. He was sitting in Papa's chair smiling at us, and when Papa came home from business and given us our kisses, he started to sit there. I cried, "No, Pa, don't sit there. Uncle Willie's sitting there." And Mama said, "I really don't know what we're going to do with that child." And Papa said, "What are you talking about, son? You know your Uncle Willie's been dead 2 years. Mildred, take him upstairs at once." But when we got to the nursery, I asked Mildred, "Didn't you see Uncle Willie?" She said, "Of course not, you horrid little fibber." I couldn't make it out. I felt quite miserable. And then after I was in bed, Mama came in like she always does to give me my hug. But she sat down instead and said, I want to talk to you very seriously. Naughty little boys who tell such dreadful, wicked stories like that about poor Uncle Willie will never go to heaven. So you must promise me never, never to say such things again. It wasn't a story, Mama. I did see Uncle Willie. I saw him. It would be a wicked story if I said I had not. She stared at me for a long time, and then she did a big sigh. Very well. And she went away, and she didn't hug me goodnight. And that made me so wretched I cried, and I wished I could die. And all of a sudden, there was Jesus just standing there, all shiny like the sunset. He smiled so sweetly to me, as if to say, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And I thought I heard him say very softly, be at peace. And I felt happy again as we went to sleep. But today, Ma has hardly spoken to me at all. It looks as though she doesn't love me anymore. I wish I could make it out, but I try not to mind so very much because I know Jesus loves me and is not displeased with me. I asked Mama, why are your lights so much bluer when you're in church? And she said to Pa, I'm beginning to wonder if there's something wrong with the boy's eyes. And Papa said, more likely his liver. Why won't Mama tell me things when I ask her? I would like to know why there's so much yellow, like buttercups, around Papa's head, and only blue around Mama's. Although sometimes when she hugs me very hard, they go pink. And I'd like to know why Mildred's lights are just a mess, like the yolk of a dirty egg. I've told her so too, and she just says, oh, shut up, you're dotty. Whenever I've asked her what my lights are like, she says, don't talk silly, you haven't got any lights. But I know she's fibbing, because one day I asked Janet, and Janet said, Master, your lights are all colours, like that lovely stuffed bird in your papa's glass case. I was taken to town today to see about my eyes. A doctor held up a card all covered over with letters which I was to read aloud. And then after, I heard him say to Mama, there's nothing to worry about, madam. The little gentleman has perfect sight. And then today, a funny old doctor came to see me, asked me all sorts of odd questions, like, do you ever hear noises when no one is in the room? I said, yes. I sometimes hear Mama's voice in the kitchen shouting at the servants. He said, I don't mean that kind of noise. So I don't know what he did mean, but he was very kind. He had nice lights. Arnold came to tea today. We played Snap on my bed. I asked him, how's your diary coming along? He said, oh, I gave that over ages ago. It was too much sweat. I said, Arnold, I said that word once, and Mama said, only common people sweat, but gentlemen perspire. Arnold said, well, I've seen my pa wipe himself more than once and say I'm sweating like a pig. Oh, and as Arnold's father is a gentleman, I think Mama might be mistaken. Mama said, we are going to a place in Birkdale called a hydro. It's like a big hotel where people get water all over them to make them feel better. Oh. But Mildred can't go. She has to stay with Auntie Jane. That's a beastly shame. Of all the aunts, Auntie Jane is most particular. Crumbs. We're here. I loved riding on the train. It was lovely to look out the window and see all the cows and sheep in the fields, see the trees all out in blossom. I didn't like the tunnels, though, because a lot of black smoke came pouring through the windows, made a horrid smell. And I felt shy because I thought people might think it was me. There was a lovely old body sitting opposite with pretty lights, mostly pink and blue. And I wanted to speak to her, but I was afraid my mom might become vexed if I did, because she was only a common woman. But we smiled at each other now and then when Mama was not looking. I have never been in such a big house before, or had my meals with so many people who talk all at once. And instead of servants like Janet, men hand the dishes, all dressed up like Papa when he goes to a grand party. Though there are servants like Janet who empty the slops and make the beds, called chambermaids. And mine is called Sarah. She has a little brown mark on her cheek and 3 hairs sticking out. Mama said, "That is a mole. You are never to mention it to Sarah. She's Welsh." I said, do all Welsh people have moles? She said, "No, but many Welsh women are servants." I had a Turkish bath today, and I perspired like a pig. And there were these crowds of naked old parties sitting around, looking very rum. Oh, I hope when I'm grown up I shan't have a beard growing on my chest. There was a lady in church today sitting in our pew, and her inside made funny noises, a bit like when I pulled the plug in the closet. Like, I giggled once, and then I got an awful fright because I laughed in church, and that's very wicked. I've been thinking a lot about church today. If I were God, I wouldn't want people all over the place to recite the same things out of books every Sunday, because it's silly. God made the world, so God must be very clever. And I don't think clever people like silly things. They like clever things. Mr. Wilcox told me that when people are very clever, they don't like being told how clever they are because it makes them feel uncomfy. I'm sure poor God must feel very uncomfy on Sundays. We had a picnic today. My new friend Marjorie has an Aunt Miss Wakeham who hired a pony cart, and we went and had our tea under the trees. And afterwards we fed the pony buns with our hands. It was so much fun. I saw 4 little elves, much like the ones in my fairy tale books, and they stared at us as if they thought us very funny. And then off they ran. I nudged Miss Wakeham, "Look at the little elves." She said, "What? Where? Where?" But she said she couldn't see them. Perhaps it's because she wears spectacles. I was reading a book today called The Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens, and Papa took it away from me. You'll learn bad words out of that. Read this instead. He handed me a book by Walter Scott, and I must say, when I saw pictures in it of men killing each other, I did not fancy it much. Why do people who make up stories always want to make them about fighting and sticking swords into each other? Because it's a dirty trick. And what's the good anyhow? Besides, stories about people who die always make me cry. Although I know that's silly, because I know they don't die really. Grandpa and Uncle Willie look a lot nicer now than they did on Earth. I just saw Grandpa. He said, "You're quite right, my lad, and we're much happier, too." Cousin Agnes, Auntie Jane, and Mildred have all come to visit. Mildred said, "I hate Auntie Jane like Billy-O. She's a beastly old cat. Yesterday, I told her, I'm going to become an actress when I grow up." And she said, "Oh, actresses are common, wicked women, and no lady would ever want to be one." So I said, "Oh, all right then. I don't want to be a lady." She said, "Go to your room for being forward." Crumbs. I think Auntie Jane isn't fair because Papa told me Shakespeare's one of the cleverest men that ever lived. So what would be the good of him making all those plays if it's wicked to act in them? There's a rum-looking party called Miss Salt. What a funny name. She's staying here, and she has short hair, like what Papa calls a rat's back. And she talks in a manly voice, and she's got an old gentleman in her lights. So when we're sitting in the drawing room with Cousin Agnes, I said, "Why have you got an old gentleman sticking to you?" And she jumped and said, "God bless my soul, what's the little boy talking about?" And Cousin Agnes went a bit red, as if I'd said something rude, and laughed a bit. So I said, "The old gentleman I see looks a bit like Mr. Pickwick in the Dickens book, though this gentleman isn't nearly so jolly looking, and he's got a nasty red mark on his cheek." "Good gracious," she said, "that was Mr. And she said some name I can't remember. And then she stared at me, very uncomfy. Finally, she uttered, "Must go wash my paws for tea." And she left the room, and as soon as she did, Cousin Agnes said, "Why did you say that to that lady? That was such a strange thing to say." I said, "Well, it was true, so why shouldn't I?" Next day, Miss Salt came by. I was going to take a little walk down by the seashore. Would you like to come? So I had to say yes, so as not to be rude. And when we got there, and I was sitting on the lovely hot sand, she said, "How'd you know about the old gentleman?" I said, oh, I could see his face in your lights." She said, what do you mean by my lights?" I said, "Well, the colors around people, of course." She said, "What colors? I've never heard of that." I said, "Well, you must be short-sighted." She said, "No, I'm not." I said to myself, "Dear me, what's the matter with everybody?" And then I said, "This old gentleman looks very kindly most of the time, but not always. And you were very poorly once, weren't you?" "Oh, yes." "How did you know that?" I said, "I don't know, but I do know. And I know also that once upon a time you had a sweetheart he was going to marry, but he had to go away first, a long way off, and then he got hurt. And he never came back again." "I tell you what, little boy." I said, "Yes, Miss Salt," though I'd like to have called her Miss Pepper for fun. She said, "Upon my word, I believe you've got second sight. That's when people know things without being told." I said, "Oh, I reckon you're wrong there, Miss Salt. There are a fine lot of things I do not know, and I have to ask Miss Griffin, like, what is a circumcision? What is cover your neighbor's ass or his ox?" Or she said, no, I don't mean those kinds of things. I mean things like things that have happened, like me being so poorly, and about..." She reached in her satchel and drew out a funny old photograph and said, "Do you know who that is?" I said, "That's the old gentleman." She said, "Quite right, quite right." "Here's sixpence. Buy some lollipops." We're home now. That funny old doctor came to see me again. He said, "Well, you're looking better for a change of air. Do you still see things?" I said, "Oh, yes." He said, "Oh, well, now, tell me what you've seen." I said, "Well, I've seen Jesus and a lot of little elves and an old gentleman beside a Miss Salt and a few other things." He said, "Tut, tut, tut, that was a funny thing to see, wasn't it?" He meant the old gentleman. And I said, "Yes, it was a bit rum, but you're not to tell Mama?" He said, "Don't worry, doctors can always keep a secret." "Do you see anything now?" I said, "Yes, I see an old woman standing behind you with a kindly face. She's nodding. And she has white hair, part in the middle, comes down in ringlets on the sides, and a lace cap upon her head, and a lace shawl about her shoulders. She just told me she's your mother." Oh, dear me. Dear me. And then Mama came back into the room and they went off together. I am in Harrogate now, and I think staying with Auntie Maud and Uncle John is most satisfactory. Their son, my cousin Basil, he said, "Do you know how babies come?" I said, "Yes, Miss Griffin told us. The doctors bring them in a leather bag." He laughed at me in a most provoking way and said, "You are a booby not to know they come from women's insides." I said, "I don't believe that at all." He said, "Well, it's true. Boy told me so at school." There's a lovely old tree in Uncle John's backyard, and I sat for a long time looking into the little gnome who lives inside it. He has long, slender legs and a red cap, and the rest of him is the color of the trunk of the tree. And sometimes he comes out of his tree, and he goes prancing about in the grass in such a funny way. I want to giggle, but I'm afraid I might make him offended. But when I asked Basil about the gnome, he poked fun at me. He said, "There's no such things, and you're a silly ass to believe such fiddlesticks." And then I asked old James, the gardener, and he said, "Well, master, if I was your age, there's no telling what I'd see. But I'm getting older now, and my eyes ain't what they used to be." There's a clergyman named Mr. Ramsbottom who came to lunch today with Auntie Maud. And I'm mighty glad Basil was not there, because I know we'd have giggled. This Mr. Ramsbottom talks an awful lot. And Auntie Maud is such a polite lady, and she kept saying, "Oh, yes, Mr. Ramsbottom? Is that so, Mr. Ramsbottom? Fancy that, Mr. Ramsbottom. I nearly wet my knickerbockers trying not to burst." And when he now and again passed a remark to me, I thought it would do to say, "Yes, sir," because I could not take it upon myself to say, "Yes, Mr. Ramsbottom." Mama fetched me home yesterday. Fancy, Mr. Wilcox arrived in a cab. He's feeling poorly, so Mama invited him to come be ill at our house. Mildred said he's got a carbuncle somewhere. I think Mr. Wilcox's carbuncle is where he sits down, because I saw sort of a shadow there in his lights. Come to find out, Mr. Wilcox's carbuncle is on his bottom. He told me so himself as a great secret. And then he said, "I'd like to see a few bumptious people get a carbuncle on their bums. That'd soon take him down a peg or two." Don't tell anyone I said that. I love Mr. Wilcox. He's so amiable, and he comes out with his naughty things now and then. I'm writing my diary in the arbor. I love the smell when the flowers are out. Love to feel the air on my face. I do wish I didn't have to wear clothes. Must be lovely to feel the air all over. Mr. Wilcox played piano to me today. I see the most beautiful things when I hear music. I'm sure there must be a lot of music in heaven, though I don't believe people sit around all day playing on harps. Papa thinks music's silly. He says, "I can't tell God Save the Queen from Pop Goes the Weasel." Mama said, "We are going to a place called Keswick in the Lakes, and Mr. Wilcox is to come with us." Oh, what fun. We're here, and I have seen crowds of elves and gnomes and fairies all over the place, and it's simply lovely. A young lady and gentleman turned up at our lodgings last night, and Papa said, "They must be on that." And I woke up to a thud in the middle of the night, and I heard these awful sounds like someone was being hurt. And so I told them about her breakfast this morning, and Mama blushed and sort of giggled. And Papa said some word in French, like enfant terrible, or some such, which I found very confounding. I've been thinking I never see Jesus in church. Wonder why? Well, I suppose he can't be in all churches in once, and so perhaps one day it'll be our turn. I'm in school now. There is a Miss Enid, and I'm in her class, and I do not like her lights, and I find her very frightening. She had a little girl in our class recite a poem today called Little Jim, and it was so sad I began to cry. And Miss Enid said, "What are you making that noise for?" I said, "I can't help it. The poetry's so mournful." She said, "Don't be silly, or I shall have to punish you." And then the other children sniggered at me for being such a booby. And on the playground, the boys made fun of me, cry baby. I think Miss Enid is a hard, unkind old maid. She's nearly always cross, and when she gets into a real wax, my heart goes all queer and does pit-a-pat. Today's my birthday. Before I went to sleep, Grandpa showed up and said, "I wish you many happy returns." I said, how'd you know it was my birthday? He said, "I sort of knew it from your thoughts." I love old Grandpa. He feels so kind. I wonder how much dead people like Grandpa can see. Can they see us when we're bathing? Or when we're using the closet? I'm sure Mama would be quite put out if Grandpa were to turn up at one of those places. Oh, but I don't suppose he would, because that would be rude, and I don't think nice dead people go where they're not wanted. Uncle Robert was found dead in his bed. The funeral's tomorrow. Then I suppose I shall have to wear a black coat. It does seem funny that people should stick on black because other people have gone to have a good time in spirit land. I'd like to wear something nice and bright and cheerful and colorful, like yellow or blue or pink. Grandpa showed up and said, "You're quite right, my boy." I can't bear school. I am in such a funk of Miss Enid that whenever I go to say my French verbs, they all fly out of my head, though I knew them quite well at home. Well, today something happened which paid her out grand. A little boy named Jimmy Cole said, "Excuse me, Miss Enid, may I please leave the room?" She said, "No, you may not leave the room." And Jimmy Cole went, and he did number one on the floor. Oh! Miss Enid had to wipe it up with the towel she used to wipe the blackboard with. By gum, wasn't she in a rage? But she couldn't say much to Jimmy because it was her own fault. And then afterwards, she snatched up our exercise books and said, "I see one mistake, it goes on the floor. Pick it up! You're all enough to try the patience of Job!" I hate Mondays when I have to go back to school. I have an awful feeling in my middle, and my heart goes pitter-pat, and I don't want to eat when I get home. Finally, Mama said, "What is the matter with you? You're so white. You're not eating enough." I said, "I think it's Miss Enid. She gives me the Jim Jams." Mama said, "What?" "Oh, perhaps it's something else. I know better. I saw Grandpa tonight. He said, 'You will soon see a doctor. Be sure and tell him about your schoolmistress. It's very important that you do, so don't forget.' Grandpa was right. A doctor came to see me, but I didn't want to tell him about Miss Enid with Mama in the room. And then suddenly someone came to the door about a subscription or something, and Mama had to leave us for a bit. So when she did, I told the doctor all about Miss Enid and the awful feeling in my middle and my heart going pitter-pat and all. And then Mama came back in the room, said, 'You can run along now.' But the doctor stayed talking to her for a long time. I could see his carriage out the nursery window. It was there for ages. Before I went to bed, Grandpa popped in and said, "We did it. We sent that person along for the subscription just then to get your mother out of the room." "Cheer up, my lad. We're looking after you. And soon you will learn there will be no more school." What? There will be no more school. Oh, I can jump up to the ceiling. I could indeed. Oh, what a relief. Thank you, Grandpa. Thank you, Grandpa. Oh. Wonder what's going to happen to me now. I have a tutor now. He comes to the house. His name is Mr. Patmore, and I like him very much. He's not at all like Miss Enid. He's got a little white beard like a nanny goat and a humorous look in his eye. I'm not a bit afraid of him. And he said, "I'm sure we'll get along like a house afire." I said, "I'm sure too." He said, "Well, that's good. By the way, where's the WC? It's always good to know the geography of a place." I said, I thought geography had to do with maps." He said, "Oh, well, that too, that too." And then we had a lovely lesson. And before he left, he clapped me on the back. "Keep your pecker up, old man. Do your lessons well, and we'll make a great scholar of you in no time." I am so happy of Mr. Patmore. There's something up with Ma. This morning, all of a sudden, she got sick right in the coal box because she couldn't make it to the closet in time. And she's got all fat about the middle, like the vicar. I asked Mildred, and she said, "Oh, well, she'll soon be thin again." I said, "How do you know that?" She said, "Never you mind." I said, "Mildred, have you noticed anything different about her lights?" She said, "What? Do you mean to tell me you still pretend to see your silly lights? I think you're cracked, or else you're the greatest fibber I've ever struck." "Fibber yourself," said I, "unless you're blind as a bat." She said, "Oh, don't boil your head." Me a fibber indeed. It's a queer thing, but I'm to go and stay with Auntie Maud and Uncle John for a week. And before I left, Janet said, "When you come back home, you might find a lovely surprise." Well, I'm here. I often take a book into the greenhouse, and the gardener comes in, waters the flowers. I told him, "The gnome's still there." He said, "Oh, you don't say. Well, that's a fine old tree. We're going to have to do a bit of lopping one of these days." I said, "But you're not going to cut down the tree, are you? Because I think that would break the poor little chap's heart. He seems so proud of his tree." "Oh, set your mind to rest, master. We'll just cut off some of the top branches, and they'll sprout all the merrier." I'm mighty glad to hear that. Auntie Maud got a letter from Papa this morning, and fancy, I've got a little sister. "How old is she?" I said. Auntie Maud said, "How old is she? What do you mean, dear? She's just a tiny baby." Oh. I merely asked because if doctors bring them in bags, can't they keep them in there for a bit? You know, like people keep eggs. She laughed and said, "Well, aren't you pleased?" I said, "I don't know. I have to think about it a bit. I don't much fancy a baby about the place. They slobber and squawk and smell. When Mama made me kiss that baby and Mrs. Stick in the muds, I thought it appalling." She laughed again and said, "Upon my word, you are a caution." Yeah. Wonder why everyone thinks me such a caution. What is a caution, anyhow? I'm home. That baby is an ugly-looking concern, and how it does squawk. And Mama looks her old self again. I suppose it was the baby after all. And the talk about doctors bringing babies in bags was all flapdoodle. Something happened today so queer, you could have knocked me over with nothing. Mr. Patmore brought me a letter that I'd sent to him while I was away to show me some spelling mistakes. And then he said, oh, and I was very amused by the little gnome you pretended to see in the tree. I said, pretended? I didn't pretend, I saw it. And he looked rather serious. He said, are you a truthful little boy? I said, very truthful. He said, you think perhaps you might have a very vivid imagination? I said, well, I'm quite sure it wasn't my fancy. Well, 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 he said, still serious. That wasn't the end of it. Later we had geography, and he was pointing to a map of Canada, and I don't know why, but as I was in one of my knowing moods, so I said, you won't get cross if I tell you something? He said, I promise. I said, you were on a big boat going to Canada, and on the boat you met a young lady, and you got sweet on her, and you thought you might like her for your missus. But then after you got to Canada, you didn't see her for a bit. And then when you did see her again, you got kind of disappointed, and you thought you wouldn't fancy her for your missus after all. I'll be jiggered. How the dickens did you know that? I almost forgot about it myself. I said, I don't know, it just comes to me. He said, well, that's extraordinary. Can you tell me anything else? And I was about to say no, and I saw a queer-looking customer with a big hat in the room. And I looked at him, and the spirit said, ask him if he remembers Sam North. So I asked him, and Mr. Patmore said, don't I remember him? That was a fine gent. Why? I said, why? Because he's standing right there. You can't see him. Oh, go on with you. Of course I can't see him. I only wish I could. Mr. North said, tell him he'll see me all right when he gets over here. So I did. And after he cleared off, Mr. Patmore said, I'll be jiggered again. I don't know how you could have known about that lady on the boat or about Sam North. I said, now will you believe me when I tell you I've seen a gnome? He said, I don't think you are lying. Papa told me today's the first day of spring, and a fine day it's been, all sunny and warm. Upon my word, it's a fine thing to wake up and hear birds singing like mad, and hear the cocks crowing in Smith's yard, and the hens all clucking, and see the buds all out on the trees, getting all fat and sticky. Mama's bosom friend, Mrs. Chambers, is coming to dinner tonight with her husband, and she said, when they arrive, you are not to pass any personal remarks. I said, what do you mean? Oh, you mean about Mr. Chambers' wig? She said, I mean about anything. I said, all right, I'll keep mum. I said, I'll keep mum. When I was in cathedral today, I was wondering an awful lot about God. Though I know Mama would say, it is wicked to question what we are told. But then I heard Jesus say, my son, it is never a sin to think, but it is not always wise to tell one's thoughts to others. Henry and Arnold and I were allowed to take sandwiches for a long walk in the woods to pick bluebells. It was lovely. And I saw a group of funny-looking dwarves doing something to the leaves of a huge old beech tree. Henry could pull some awful faces, like, he's very clever at belching, too. He did some fine ones for us. Except once he overdid it a bit. He almost got sick. He said, sometimes at home when my pa belches, he makes as if it had only been a cough, like, I was asked to Charlie Bain's house to tea this afternoon. Miss Enid used to call him Mr. Lazy Lump, which I thought was going too far. If he is a lump, he cannot help being as he's made. And after tea, he pulled out his eggs. Some of them were ever so pretty, but I couldn't help saying, I think it is a cruel, mean trick. to go and take the eggs away from the poor little birds after they built their nests and are so happy and all. Charlie wasn't of the same mind. There's no use talking to him. He just looked at me like a cow. Only he's not got such beautiful eyes as some cows I've met with. He asked me, "Do you believe in ghosts?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You ever seen one?" I said, "Lots." He said, "Honor bright?" "Honor bright," said I. He said, "Weren't you afraid?" I said, "Not when they're nice ghosts, but I don't like the nasty ones." "The servants say there's a ghost in this house." I said, "They're quite right. I've seen it. It's a lady, a young lady. I saw her on the stair, and she has a gown to the floor, which kind of sticks out all round. And when she moves, it makes sort of a noise, like..." He said, "Do you mean that, or are you fooling?" "Honor bright," said I. He said, "Upon my Sam, you make me feel all funny." I said, "Go on with you. She won't hurt you. She's quite a respectable kind of ghost. She means no harm." The baby isn't quite as ugly as it was, but that's not saying much. Mr. Patmore said, "Since we've had our talks, I've been reading about something called spiritualism, and I would like you to come to my house this Saturday for tea. My missus would like to meet you." We had a grand tea, hot currant buns, plenty of jam, and Mrs. P was ever so pressing, "Have some more, have some more." And then afterwards I saw a big black dog sitting by Mr. Patmore's feet, and I said, "Did you ever have a big black dog?" They both looked so sad. And Mrs. P said, "Yes, we had one called Jacques, but he died last autumn." I said, "He's sitting right there. He's sitting right there by the chair. And he knows we're talking about him because he's wagging his tail." Oh, it surprised them so much, and it pleased them so much. Mr. Patmore said, "I knew animals ought to have souls." And then before I left, I saw Spirit, and he said, "I am Mrs. Patmore's papa." So I told her. She said, "What's he look like?" I said, "He has sort of sticky out teeth." She said, "My papa did have sticky out teeth, rather." So the Spirit said, "Please tell them to keep up with that spiritualism, as it'll make all the difference in their lives." So I told them, and they were extremely pleased. It is ripping to make people feel sort of happy. Mr. Patmore said that the lights I see around people is called aura. So I told him some people's auras are just a mess and nothing but a horrid muddle. But other people's auras are nice and pretty and bright and colorful. And some people's auras end in a hard outline like Mama's. Other people's auras sort of get thinner and thinner at the edges like a soft cloud. I told him his aura is very beautiful, with lots of green and gold and pink and blue. He was extremely delighted. We have been to Ilkley to attend Cousin Agnes's wedding, and in the wedding she had to promise to love, honor, and obey Mr. Hopkins. I thought that a bit much. What if Mr. Hopkins turned out to be a very wicked man? What if he ordered his bride, "Go grab that lady's handbag"? Then she'd have to obey him. I wonder who made up the marriage ceremony. I'm sure it wasn't God or Jesus. Mama said that for my holiday, I'm going to a place called Harlech, Wales, and I'm to go with Mr. and Mrs. Patmore. Yes, what fun. We're here. We've been here for a week. I got a letter from Mama this morning. She said, "I hope you were attentive in church on Sunday." Mr. Patmore and I did not go to church on Sunday. We went for a walk instead. He said, "I believe one can worship God by being in nature and feeling thankful for all the beautiful things he's given us." And I am of the same mind, to be sure. I saw Grandpa. He said, heaven isn't a bit like what people think. It's much nicer. And by, crowds of folks will believe in the spirits, much like they believe in Jesus now. And when they do, they will be so much happier. And they won't mind such an awful lot about death. I said, if you die when you're old, do you stay old when you get to heaven? He said, no. Where I am, you can look however you want to look. Young, old, whatever you like. I appear old to you when I visit you, so you'll recognize me. Oh, I said. Oh, he said. Then he said, fancy this one. Some spirits do not know they are dead. What? Later that night, a spirit appeared who did not know he was dead. Here's the corker. He was a man who did not believe in spirits. And he'd been an old friend of Mr. Patmore's. So, first thing he said when he entered the room was, hello, Patmore, fancy seeing you here. So I repeated that and everything else to Mr. Patmore, and he took notes. So Mr. Patmore said, hello, who are you? Spirit said, who am I? What a question. I'm Jimmy Cliff. Don't you recognize me? Oh, I'll be blowed, Jimmy Cliff. Oh, well, no, of course I can't recognize you. I can't see you. What? I am so happy you have come, Mr. Patmore said. Tell me, how you feeling? Oh, I never felt better in my life. Physically. Mentally, I seem a bit confused. It's damn queer. Mr. Patmore said, now, you used to not believe in spirits. I suppose you've altered your views now? I have not. Why should I? Well, surely you believe in an afterlife now. I don't believe in anything of the kind. Who's the lad, by the way? Why is he repeating to you everything I say? Because he can see and hear you, and I can't. Why? Have you gone blind and deaf? No, of course not. It's just that now you are a spirit, and I can't see spirits. I am not a spirit. I don't believe in spirits. I never did. Surely you can't believe you're still walking on this earth. Cliff, can you remember what happened to you recently? Yes, I remember feeling infernally ill. And then I lost all consciousness. And then I woke up feeling better than ever. Yes. And then what? Look here, Patmore, I resent all this interrogation and you writing everything I say down like a policeman. I'm so sorry, my dear Cliff. It's just that I am very interested in what you have to say. You don't seem to realize that you are what we call dead, though I appreciate you feel much more alive. Dead? What rubbish! I'm not dead. When we die, that's the end of us. You always did annoy me when we got talking on this topic. You won't face facts. You can't get round science. I'm leaving. Goodbye. He left and Mr. Patmore said he has not changed one bit. At supper tonight, I asked, what does it mean to lust after a woman in one's own heart? And Mrs. Patmore sort of half laughed and half looked as though she didn't know where to look. And Mr. Patmore said, there's some parts of the Bible which I just can't explain just now. Yeah, I suppose it's something rude. When Henry came to visit, I asked him, he said, lust. I think it's got something to do with making babies, but I'm not sure what. I wish I knew. Henry and I caught a man sprawling all over a woman in the sandhills, which I thought very funny. But Henry said, when common people want to get married, they often do that beforehand. And then in the upper hills, I saw these big stones sticking up and a lot of queer-looking blokes in long hooded gowns, sort of praying and doing peculiar things. Mr. Patmore said, oh, those might have been the Druids of long ago. They were good men. and ever so wise. Fancy. And then in the fields I saw a lot of sheep with such sad-looking faces. It makes me feel awful that they go and get killed for us to have with our suppers. Mr. Patmore said there's some kinds of people called something like vegetators, and they won't eat sheep or cows or anything. That's what I would like to be. A queer-looking spirit showed up tonight. He had a bald head, big long white beard, and black clothes down to the floor, and he seemed to be giving us like a sermon. He said, "Hearken well to my words. Behold, it is given but to the elect to hear the voices of the spirits. Therefore be thankful to the Lord thy God for the blessings he hath bestowed upon thee and thy wife through the instrumentality of this boy, his servant. Lo, in the days of yore, the voice of the spirits could be heard by the righteous. But in latter days, man hath turned away from the paths of God and have offered himself up to iniquity and unrighteousness. And he went on and on and on and on. And then he left, and Grandpa popped in and said, I did it for fun. I did it for fun. I told him to come give you a sermon. You see, he'd been a preacher whilst on earth, and now he's got to spirit land. He does not want to shut up preaching. You mustn't think people change all of a sudden when they turn their toes up. It takes some spirits a long time, as you reckon it, to become different. Well, a man does not change when he takes off his overcoat, and he does not change when he takes off his body. I said, oh. He said, oh. Well, my baby's sister still squawks an awful lot, but in all events isn't nearly so ugly, which is a great advantage. The pater often reminds me for kissing Fluffy, but I can't help it. She's so soft and warm. And much preoccupied now with her two little kittens, which she washes a great deal. Oh, how awful it would be if women had to lick their babies all over like that. Oh, I got a horrid fright last night. My number 2 was all red like blood. And I told Mama, and she called in the doctor, and he asked me all sorts of questions, and then he looked very perplexed, and then he wrote me a subscription for some beastly medicine. And then later I saw Grandpa in my room, and he said, you look worried, my lad. So I told him about my number 2, and he said, well, I don't see anything wrong with you there. Have you been eating beets? I said, yes. He said, well, there you go. It's the beets. Nincompoop doctors always looking for trouble when there is none. Oh, I said, what am I to do with the horrid medicine? You are to throw it in the sink and pretend you've taken it. Dear old Grandpa. What a relief. I have been sort of seeing things that seem to have happened ages ago, with people all dressed up in funny old-fashioned clothes. And then I heard Jesus say, my son, this is not your first life on earth. Souls do return, and those ye have loved, you meet again to rejoice. And those ye have hated, you meet again to suffer, and if wise, to forgive. I saw something else that seemed like a dream, but I was wide awake. And in it, I was sitting all by myself in a cave, nearly naked. And my body was all brown, like chocolate. And the weather was awfully hot, but I felt happy and peaceful inside, as if I loved the whole world. And a boy walked in with sort of a towel wrapped round his head, and he bowed before me and handed me a bowl with something to eat in it. I think I was very old, and this boy sort of looked after me. He wasn't a son, but sort of a pupil. And then some men walked in, also with towels on, and they bowed before me. And I taught them things which sounded very wise. Though I can't remember a thing I said. Will wonders never cease? Fancy, I have been wrong about Jesus this whole time. He said to me, my son, be not sad if I tell you I am not Jesus. I am another one, it is time you know, another one who has been your teacher through many lifetimes. I appeared to you as Jesus because his image is familiar to you and because he is one whom you love and trust to help you. We call ourselves the Elder Brothers. You may call me EB for short. I live in an Eastern body, which I have the power to leave at will and appear in spirit to those who have the capacity to see. And that capacity you acquired in the Indian life, which you recalled the other day in your vision. Your powers in one life appear as talents in later lives. No effort is lost. My, when I hear the EB speak, he sounds so kind and gentle. Not at all like that preacher who sort of bellowed at us, sounding like a bull in a Chinese shop. One night, Mr. Patmore asked the EB, what must one do so as not to come to earth again? He said, do good for its own sake. It is sometimes our attachment to desires that lasso us back into returning. But unattachment is not being dependent on anything external for one's happiness. The only true and lasting happiness is to be found within. Grandpa brought in a new spirit from Ireland. God bless y'all. It's a fine thing to be talking to your poor souls, still caged in your bodies like birds in an aviary, flying a little bit here, a little bit there, but no getting away at all, at all. And it's a fine thing to be seeing a boy with second sight as keen as the eyes of an eagle. Oh, if the blind ones of earth only knew we're not sitting in a dank, dusty grave. And me, such an ignorant man whilst living on earth. I was always in fear of going to hell. I heard I might go to hell. I don't want to go to hell. Oh, I hope I don't go to hell. What if I go to hell? Oh. Let ye know, if there be a hell, it is of man's creation. Because here is a world of joy and loveliness and music and flowers and butterflies. And we are happy and light as a bit of thistledown floating on the breezes of a summer's morn. You shine in the light of truth from your heart with the milk of human kindness. You keep listening to the voice of the spirits now. Godspeed, y'all. Queer-looking customer in a sailor suit turned up after that. He said, I was drowned in the sea a short while ago, and I wanted to give a message to me old ma. She lives nearby. Please. So I took down his address, and I gave it to Mr. Patmore. And then the sailor said, tell her to give over grieving like that. Makes me so bloody miserable. I'd be quite happy here with my mates if only me old ma would stop blubbing. Makes my heart ache. I tried to comfort her myself. She can't hear me. Tell the old gal to smile. Tell her I'm alive. I'm alive, and I'm kicking, and I'm hanging around. If only she could see me. Please. So Mr. Patmore went to that old lady's house, and when he came back, he said, that was the most narrow-minded old female I've ever struck. It was like talking to a cartload of bricks. When he gave her the message, she said, that's the devil's doing. My son is dead, and he will not rise until the day of resurrection. And still, Mr. Patmore talked nearly till doomsday, and finally he gave it up and came back with his tail between his legs. And the sailor showed up and said, I was there the whole time. I saw it was a no-go. You know what it is? It's these bloody parsons stuffing folks up with lot bloody rot. What does the harm to poor old gals like me ma? And there are parsons over here now who now feel sorry for the fear-filled lies they told and that want to make amends. Crikey, I wonder what the vicar would have to say to that. Or the poor mater. She'd probably go up in spontaneous combustion. A spirit arrived who was a scientist. He said, when I was on Earth, I was a man of science, and at that time I maintained that the end of the body was also the end of all consciousness. Not so. Not so. So, what are the facts? We, my good sirs, we are the facts. We are here. We survive to refute the negation of survival. But because not every person can perceive us, it is argued that we do not exist. And that is ignorance of a fundamental cosmic principle, vibration. Our spiritual bodies vibrate at a higher rate than do your physical bodies, which is why only those with clairvoyance can see those higher vibrations of nature, which are not visible to the ordinary naked eye. Mr. Patmore said, who is talking to us now? Is it your soul? It is more like a garment of my soul. Now later on, I shall shed this garment and live in a yet higher world of consciousness, the vibrations of which are still more rapid, and the substance of which is still more rarefied and not so dense. And here's a point worthy of note. All progress is a step toward greater happiness. An elder brother came tonight, and he said, love, my sons, is a bridge between you and the unseen. On the wings of love, your mind may fly to us. If there is a problem that frets you or confuses you, you may think of us with love. Still the ripples of your mind. Listen with your inner self and receive your answer. My sons, there is but one life manifesting through all forms, and there is but one self manifesting through all selves, and that self is one with love. In your scriptures it says, love thy neighbor as thyself. Ye deem it to mean, love your neighbor as much as you love yourself, but it means love thy neighbor as thyself, as he is one with yourself, as there is but one self. Many waves come up out of the sea, and yet all are one with the sea. So it is with thyself and thy neighbors. Only when humankind realize this shall problems end and bliss be known. Peace be with you. The spirit said, he was a llama. I asked Mr. Patmore, is he an animal? Mr. Patmore said, no, the animal's spelled with 2 L's, but with 1 L it means sort of a monk. Tonight Grandpa came. He gave us a talking to about love. He said, in the spirit world, it's love what counts. And the grand people here are not the ones who used to be lords and ladies and dukes and duchesses on earth. No, no, no. The grand people here are the ones who shine the most with the light of love. You ought to try and love everyone, be they ever so humble or ever so wicked. People on earth kind of try to hide their love or smother it as if they thought it wrong or milk sloppy. You oughtn't to do that. Love's the most beautiful thing in the world. It's what holds the world together. If God were not love, the world would go to smithereens. When you meet a body you don't like, say inside yourselves many times, peace be with you. Peace be with you. You might feel a bit differently about them then. When people can't see the good in others, it's often due to just silly pride. You ought to learn to be more humble and feel kind and loving toward everyone. Then he looked at me. You keep up with that writing, Sonny, and mark my words, it will get printed one day. I said, oh? He said, oh, that's right. And you know what? It'll help to lighten the darkness. Now, don't you forget what your grandpa says. Go on. Dear old grandpa. I don't know what he means by lighten the darkness, but I shall persevere with my diary. Not my dairy, my diary. I shall persevere with my diary. Thank you. Oh, don't stop.
Keep clapping.
Oh, thank you.
Come here. So Harry has a YouTube channel. We
Yes.
just talked about it earlier. I've used up all my words for today.
You've used enough,
Yes.
honey. It's
Tell me.
Holy Mackerel Moments.
Holy mackerel moments. And just before he leaves, or we depart, I want him to tell at least one or two of those holy mackerel moments. Would you do that?
Like I
Okay.
told you earlier?
Yeah.
All right. I get so excited when I see synchronicity that amazes me, that makes me think, how could that have happened? And that's why I called it. These are moments that make you want to say, holy mackerel. Because when you think about it, the implications of how life really works are mind-boggling when you look at these instances of synchronicity. Now, I'm sure we've all experienced them in everyday life, just little moments you go, oh. But I told Maureen earlier, my two favorite ones, they're kind of major, but they exemplified the term to me. Do you know the movie, The Wizard of Oz?
No.
Ah, liar. Who doesn't? Well, you know there's a character named Professor Marvel. After Dorothy sings Over the Rainbow, she runs away from home and she sees a guy in a trailer in the woods roasting a hot dog, and he gives her like a bogus crystal ball reading and sends her home, and that's when the twister happens. That character, Professor Marvel, had a costume that Victor Fleming, the director, wanted to look very authentic, very of the time, but a feeling of grandeur gone to seed, kind of like the man. He was getting on, he was down on his luck, so he wanted a feeling of elegance, but worn out. So he sent the wardrobe people all over Los Angeles to secondhand stores and thrift stores and used clothing stores to find just the right jacket for that character's costume. And they brought back hundreds. So the director went through them with a fine-tooth comb every day. Finally, he kept coming back to one Prince Albert jacket with a swallowtail back and a velvet collar, elegant. And yet the collar was frayed and the color was faded. Perfect. So they called in Frank Morgan, the actor. He tried it on. It fit perfectly. That's the jacket they used in the film. During shooting, Frank Morgan is sweating, and the makeup person is not around to blot him, so he reaches in the pocket of the jacket to get a handkerchief, and he blots himself, and he notices he pulled the lining out of the jacket pocket. Sewn on the lining was a cloth name tag of the original owner of the jacket. The original owner was L. Frank Baum, the man who wrote The Wizard of Oz. Yeah. Hello, I'm telling you.
Holy mackerel.
Holy mackerel, yes. And apparently they got a letter from the tailor of the jacket, who was still alive, and from Baum's widow, affirming that that jacket had belonged to L. Frank Baum many years before. And the other one is, little girl in Lone Pine, California, lost her father. He died. Their favorite thing to do together was to watch the Little Mermaid movie. So she and her mother went to Kmart and got a beautiful, colorful Little Mermaid helium balloon, and the mother thought it'd be fun for her to try to send it to Papa up in heaven. So they wrote their name and address and put it in an envelope and put the envelope in plastic and tied it to the string and let it loose in Lone Pine, California. Heard nothing for months. One day in the mailbox is a package from the people who found the balloon. It didn't go a mile or two or three. It went all the way across the United States, landed in a bush at the edge of Prince Edward Island off the coast of Maine. A couple found it stuck in the bush, and they found the address and then wrote to the people. Here's the thing. The bush the balloon was stuck in was on the edge of Mermaid Lake in the town of Mermaid. That's that.
Yes. Holy mackerel. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Harry.
Thank you,
I just want to remind, I know this is long for the live stream tonight, but do I still have time to remind them that they can go to, those who watched us on the live stream can go to CSL.org, and there's a donate button on the website if you would like to honor Harry by contributing to this evening that way. I just want to thank everybody who is here tonight. Harry is just one of the most delightful friends I have. Go and see his Holy Mackerel series on YouTube and enjoy the rest of your evening and travel home in safety and good order. Thank you for being here. All right. Holy mackerel.